The Saint Antoine Church, frozen at the top of the hill, seemed to be a mute witness to the history of the village. Built in the 13th century, its grey stones were shiny under the weight of the centuries, their roughness marked by bad weather and the memories of the souls who had gathered there over the generations. The cypress trees that surrounded it, tall and dark, seemed to lean over the building, as if to protect its buried secrets. It was even said that a strange wind sometimes blew through their branches, bringing whispers from another time. That morning, the atmosphere was special. A menacing grey sky stretched over the village, tinting the land with a palpable melancholy. The birds did not sing. The wind did not move the leaves. Everything was suspended in the air, as if nature itself shared the weight of the mourning that fell on the Durand family. The silence seemed deeper, heavier than usual, permeating the space around the church, the entire village. The Durand family, gathered for the final farewell to their patriarch, also seemed enveloped in this strange atmosphere. Marcel Durand, the man whose shadow had stretched over the city for decades, had just passed away at the age of 86. Long respected, sometimes feared, Marcel had been the pillar of a scattered family. His 3 children, Julian, Claire and Edward, had each taken different paths, forming lives often marked by silences and tensions that it had become impossible to circumvent. Julian, the eldest son, was a man with harsh features, marked by a life of difficult decisions and overwhelming responsibilities. Claire, the youngest, was gentler, but her eyes always said that there were storms inside her. Edouard, the youngest, had always been the one who avoided conflicts, preferring to stand aside, observing things from afar. But today the family was here, obliged to meet under the same roof, in the same church, to pay homage to a man who, despite his age, remained an imposing, almost intimidating figure. In the first row, Claire, the most emotional, held her 8-month-old son in her arms, Leo. Leo was a calm baby, incredibly calm, and his parents had often wondered if a child could be that peaceful. There was something special about him, a sort of aura that seemed to connect him to invisible forces. Claire never spoke about it out loud, but she knew. She knew that her son carried something older within him, something that neither she nor her husband quite understood.
The light of a coffin lay in front of the altar, gleaming in the dim candlelight.
The room was plunged into an almost eerie tranquility. The priest, old and tired, recited prayers in Latin, a language that most of the guests no longer understood. But it didn't matter. The words were lost in the heavy air, enveloped by sobs that erupted here and there, furtive glances exchanged between members of the family, as if to reassure each other. Time seemed to stand still. The silence, at times, was heavier than the words themselves, as if the church itself was holding its breath. And then it happened. Leo, until then motionless in his mother's arms, suddenly stood up, his little back straight as an arrow. His gaze, usually relaxed and curious, suddenly became intense, almost piercing. His light blue eyes, too deep for a child, focused on a specific point, just above the coffin, where the air seemed to vibrate with an invisible presence. Claire, confused, tried to get his attention, but Leo didn't look at her. He raised his hand, his little finger extended toward the empty space. And in a pure, almost unreal burst of laughter, he burst out laughing. This laughter which broke the tension, which cast a strange veil over the assembly. It resonated in the church like a bell suspended in time. An innocent, crystalline laugh, but one that seemed strangely out of place in a place where death was present. Heads turned instantly. The faces frozen, like the same movement. A single breath of disbelief passed through the crowd. Some, taken aback, laughed nervously, thinking that the child was just playing. But in the back of the church, where the light fell more heavily, it was obvious that Leo was not laughing at random. He was looking at something. Not an object, not a person, but a space. A void that seemed charged with a presence that only he could see. He held out his arms, as if this presence was calling him. And in this pure and strange gesture, he spoke a word that left all the guests speechless. Marcel. This word, spoken in such an innocent way, but yet so precise. Marcel. This name that Claire, until this moment, would never have imagined hearing from her son. This name, that of his father, the great patriarch of the family, who had just left this world. Astonishment fell on the assembly like a leaden screed. Claire, petrified, looked at her son, then at her father's coffin, first in disbelief, then worried. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she forced herself to breathe. How could he know this name? He had never heard of Marcel. He had never even seen her face. He couldn't. A murmur ran through the church, faint at first, then growing louder. Voices crossing, fleeting glances, signs of the cross thrown here and there. An old cousin, nervous, made the sign of the cross, a tradition she believed to be protective. In the crowd, Edward, the eldest, felt an icy shiver running down his spine. He turned suddenly, a cold sweat beading on his forehead, as if he had felt an invisible presence brushing against his shoulder. He scanned the faces around him, but no one seemed to have noticed. Everyone knew, silently, that something inexplicable had just happened.
And yet, no one dared to break this strange silence. After the ceremony, a heavy and depressive silence invaded the family home.
The guests dispersed into the different rooms, but none really seemed present. The funeral meal, organized in the Durand's old stone building, had always been a moment of reunion, of sharing memories, but that day, the heaviness of the air seemed to crush any form of communication. The faces were serious, the conversations rare. The superficial discussions, which usually filled this type of occasion, had disappeared. Everyone was prey to their own thoughts, but one subject in particular obsessed everyone's minds: Leo's gesture. The little baby who, in the coldness of the ceremony, had suddenly reacted with such intensity.
The pure laughter, the fixation on an invisible point, the evocation of Marcel.
These events, both strange and confusing, haunted the guests throughout the day. The furtive glances, the whispers, all of this marked the atmosphere of the afternoon, where we drank a drink without really tasting it, where we chewed tasteless mouthfuls, and where conversations went in circles, always returning to this unreal scene. Claire tried to put on a good face. She sometimes laughed in a way that was too forced to be natural, exchanged a few words with her brothers, but deep down, her mind was elsewhere. Leo occupied all her thoughts, and this strange sensation that an invisible veil was lifting over a past buried for too long was gnawing at her. She tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming back, like a weight on her heart. Evening fell, and with it, the silence grew heavier. The guests eventually left, leaving Claire alone with her son.
Once the door is closed, a strange calm invades the house.
Claire placed Leo in his crib, kissed him gently on the forehead, and tried to get some sleep. But that night, everything changed. The baby, who usually slept peacefully, began to cry. A weak cry at first, like a whisper of pain, but soon it became more intense, almost desperate. Claire stood up quickly, worried. She checked her diapers, her toys, but there was no pain or hunger. He was crying for no apparent reason. Then she followed his gaze. Leo was looking at the ceiling with an intensity she had never seen before. He raised his arms towards this invisible point in the air, as if calling to someone. And then, in a weak but distinct breath, he said a sentence that made Claire's blood run cold.
Don't be afraid, Grandpa. Don't be afraid.
The words echoed in the silence of the room. Claire stood petrified, a cold feeling coursing through her body. The name Grandpa, which seemed so natural, so intimate, gave rise to an anxiety in her that she could not explain. Marcel, his father, had died that morning. But Leo couldn't have known this name. He had never met him. Breathless, Claire tried to calm her son, but he kept looking in the same direction, stretching out his arms as if he were looking for something or someone who was there, in this room. And as she leaned over him, an oppressive, almost supernatural feeling invaded the space. A void, an echo of the past, seemed to manifest itself in this child's cry. The next day, Claire, still shaken by this strange night, decided to search the house. She had the impression that an answer was hidden somewhere, in the recesses of the old building, under the layers of time. She went up to the attic, a dusty room filled with forgotten memories. There, in a corner, she found an old shoebox, left uncared for, probably ignored for decades. She opened it, her heart beating, and discovered inside yellowed letters, notebooks, papers that she had never seen. And at the bottom of the box, a photo, taken several decades ago, immediately caught his eye. A young man, smiling, with a frank look, the face of Marcel at 30 years old. He was carrying a baby in his arms, a baby who was not from the family she knew. Behind, a date and a hastily scribbled sentence.
For my son who will never see grow up. Claire's world's shattered.
She looked at the photo again and again, unable to understand. Had his father had another child? Another son, whom he had never mentioned. A child he had lost, who he never knew if he had survived. Reality was distorting around her. She felt the ground give way beneath her. This secret, this forgotten past, had never been mentioned in their family history. Why had Marcel never talked about this son? And above all, why did this memory come knocking so brutally on the door of his own son, Leo? She confronted her mother, Suzanne, a dignified woman, cold sometimes, but always full of reserve. The old lady, usually implacable, hesitated for a long time, then finally gave in, murmuring words that Claire never thought she would hear from her lips.
Your father loved another woman before me.
A woman who left without saying anything. She was pregnant, but he never saw her again. He never knew if the child had survived.
The words hit Claire like a shockwave. Another child, hidden, forgotten.
What if Leo, this baby she had adopted after years of infertility, was the link between two generations, between a father she barely knew and a past she ignored? What if his son, Leo, carried the soul of this lost child? The following days, Claire, consumed by her questions, decided to carry out an investigation. She contacted a genealogist, a specialist in family research, to shed light on this forgotten story. After weeks of relentless research, a truth emerged, as unexpected as it was shocking. It turned out that a son had indeed been adopted under another name, Raphael Van Neer, who died young in an accident. But Raphael had a daughter, and this girl was Leo's biological mother. The shock was immense. Leo wasn't just his adopted son. He was the hidden great-grandson of Marcel. And his laughter that day was no accident. It wasn't just a child's whim. It was a reconnaissance, a sign of a forgotten memory that had just resurfaced through the innocent arms of a baby. The past of the Durand family, this past that seemed so distant, had finally found its way into the present. And Leo, without knowing it, was the bridge between these two eras. The months passed, and with them, a subtle transformation took place within the Durand family. What had begun in the tumult of secrets and unsaid things, in the dull echo of unexpected revelations, had metamorphosed into something softer, more peaceful. Edward, previously reserved and almost frosty in his attitudes, began to open up, little by little, to the world around him. His gestures, previously rigid, took a more natural, less distant form. He laughed more often, talked more about his own past, and even about the moments spent with Marcel, those moments that he had long neglected. His heart, long trapped in a whirlwind of pain and resentment, seemed to be freed. Julien, for his part, took a first step towards his cousins, Marcel's children. He reconnected with them, leaving aside the resentments and misunderstandings that had long divided the family. Discussions, which had previously been rare and tense, became more frequent. Meals, once marked by uneasiness, were now an opportunity to share memories, to remember the laughter of yesteryear. Even the silences, these heavy silences which previously weighed on souls, now seemed to carry a new sweetness, like a form of shared respect, of silent reconciliation. And at the heart of it all, Leo grew up, serene, calm. The child, as wise as ever, continued to amaze with his tranquility, his ability to lose himself in his thoughts, often in silence. Sometimes Claire found herself watching him for hours, wondering what he could be going through in his moments of apparent solitude. Sometimes she caught him talking alone in his room, his words falling into thin air, a silent conversation with a world that only he and the invisible seemed to understand. Claire, worried at first, looked for explanations. She talked about it with her mother, with her friends, even looked in books. But, over time, something obvious began to emerge. It wasn't a problem. It wasn't madness. No, Leo was not haunted. He was guided.
Veía presence, a memory, an invisible thread between the past and the present.
And this presence was not frightening. Quite the contrary. She brought peace.
Serenity. The certainty that, somewhere, there was a continuity, a silent transmission of souls.
It was on a special day, a spring day, that Leo's story took an even more palpable turn. The family decided to pay tribute to Marcel by visiting the cemetery where he was buried. It was a sunny, calm day, one of those moments when the wind just brushes the trees, where the air is soft and light. Arriving in front of Marcel's grave, the family remained silent for a moment, as if to respect the privacy of this moment. Claire was about to place a flower on the headstone, but before she had time to do anything, Leo moved away a little. He leaned down, took in his little hands a wooden car, carefully carved, and delicately placed it on the grave of his great-grandfather. Then, in a calm voice, he said these words which, for Claire, would haunt her thoughts forever.
Here, Grandpa. I haven't forgotten you.
Tears welled up in Claire's eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of peace. A deep relief, as if a heavy mist was finally lifting. Leo had not only recognized the memory of his ancestor, he had paid homage to this invisible bond that united them all, through the ages and trials, a bond stronger than death. This gesture, simple but so significant, marked a turning point in their family history. This moment became, for Claire, a point of no return. She understood that Leo was not just the child she had adopted. He was the heir to a much larger memory, to a past which, without her knowing it, continued to manifest itself through him. In the months that followed, Leo's story, his laugh, his sometimes incomprehensible words, his gestures as if he were in contact with another world, became a sort of living legend within the Durand family. Everyone, in their own way, found in this story a reflection of their own questions, their own doubts. Leo, through his calm and innate wisdom, seemed to carry a truth that adults struggle to comprehend. He didn't laugh at death, he laughed at death, as if he saw something more in it, a passage, a link that was woven between generations, a living memory, carrying ancient knowledge that only a child could perceive. Having become a legend, Leo's story was told again and again, passed down by family members as a tradition, as a testimony to a secret truth that the adult world sometimes refused to look at. Leo was not a child like the others. He carried within him the key to an ancient wisdom, that of the ancestors, that of those who had left but who, through him, returned. And every time someone in the family doubted or got lost in thought, all they had to do was look Leo. His deep, ancient, peaceful gaze seemed to say everything that words could not express. He was the guardian of a timeless memory, one that unites the living and the dead in the same breath. And in that look, there was the certainty that there was no end, just passages, invisible encounters, bonds that never break.